Well, I'm Steve Saitzyk. I'm director of Shambhala Art, which is a nonprofit arts education program designed to integrate meditation with the creative process. I'm also an adjunct professor at Art Center College of Design in Los Angeles, where one of the courses I teach is called Meditation and the Creative Mind. I'm here basically to do a advanced teacher training for Shambhala Art teachers so that they can teach the full program here, which we hope you will all attend when it is offered. And we have a few of our graduates from that program here tonight. And then I've been asked to talk a little bit about meditation and the creative process. But I understand there may be some people here who are new to meditation and maybe didn't know what the title of the talk is. So we're going to have more of a discussion format, so we can open it up to questions. One of the areas that personally intrigues me about the creative process is there's at some point, either during the day or at some point you decide, I'm now going to make something. Whether that's a work of art, craft, or dinner, or dress yourself, okay, or an education plan for a school, is a place where we make that decision that we have a certain intent. And then the question is, what do we then do? Which is often very different for each person. Would anybody be willing to share what do they do right after they make that decision? What's the next thing that you do? Almost literally. Anyone want to volunteer on that?
You gather materials.
Maybe you gather materials. What else?
Clear a space.
Clear a space. What else?
Creative design.
Sit down.
Sit down. But before you
She
actually,
said creative design.
Creative design.
right, but before you actually do it, just for the moment, just a little investigation of the moment you decide to do it, but before you actually start manifesting it. So in that space, what are some of the things that we do?
You doubt that it's the right decision.
Doubts? Doubts arise? What else?
Procrastinate a while.
Procrastinate. How many people procrastinate? Raise your hand. Gee, what a surprise. Now, let's look at that for a moment. What is going on with that procrastination? Why? Why do you procrastinate?
I can't quite say that I know. Maybe because I'm afraid of the finished product.
Okay.
Afraid
Okay.
of
Fears, whatever they may be.
Right.
Hesitation.
Fear of failure.
Right.
What if it doesn't come out the way I want it to?
Right.
What if it's not good enough?
Yeah. Oh,
Fear of commitment.
fear of commitment.
Time.
Time.
It'll take time away from something else
Right.
I could be doing.
Right.
Lazy.
Sorry.
Lazy.
Laziness. Yes. Anything else? Yes.
Sometimes I don't know where to start. There's a big
Yeah.
picture.
You don't know where to start. Sometimes we don't know where to start. So that's interesting. And by procrastinating, what do we hope that's going to happen? You raised your hand, but I changed the question.
Yeah, something else.
For me, it's kind of like Don Juan rolling around on the ground in front of, Castaneda actually, in front of Don Juan's little
Right.
cabin, trying to find the right place to go to school.
Trying to find the right place. How many people are trying to find the right place to start? Raise your hand. Okay. What does that mean, we're trying to find the right place? What does that mean? What is the right place? How do we know it's the right place when we are at the right place?
It just, when we do it, when we take action.
When we finally start to
Yeah.
do it. But there's a really interesting moment there that takes place that's worth looking at. And I teach in a very large city to young artists and successful artists, or whatever that means. And I can tell you that there's a lot of things that people do, as you already know, to procrastinate. Some of them are kind of outrageous. Some of the things that aren't outrageous is going for a cup of coffee, reading the paper, doing some email, waiting and waiting and waiting. One screenwriter would circumnambulate their desktop computer over and over again until they could find a place to do what? To land. A place to start. And often what we're doing in that is we're trying, in some sense, to exhaust a certain state of mind. A certain amount of stuff that's going on, the chatter that's going on in our head. Now, some people use drugs to stop the chatter. Some people drink. There's a very famous painter who would, forgive me for saying this in the shrine room, have sex. I knew a number of artists who would have scheduled a show, and they wouldn't begin starting to make that art until it was simply impossible to complete the artwork before the show. So what is going on in that moment? If you think about it, in a lot of cases we're trying to either exhaust or freak ourselves out to stop all the chatter that's going on in your head. For at least a brief moment to have a little space between one storyline and the next storyline. Okay. So we can do all of these things, or what else are you discovering in the process of meditation? What does meditation do? Any volunteers? It starts to exhaust the chatter, and you don't have to become addicted to anything. You don't have to get a large liquor bill. You don't have to freak yourself out and take anti-anxiety drugs. All you have to do is sit and do what? Nothing! So here we are, we come and we sit and we do nothing. And then, when we start to engage our creative process, what do? Something. But something before we do something, and we're actually trying to find a place to land. And one of the benefits of meditation is it starts to create a space for you to land, so that you don't have to really do all of these things. Now, there's more than that I want to talk about, but is there any questions about that? Does anyone have any, is there any mystery about this, really?
And because you deal mostly with artists, would you say that that's true of other aspects of their life, not just creating, just any sort of place where they need to get still, they do that circling before they...
Don't people do that with their taxes? You're having a special dinner for your honey. Don't you do that when you're trying to figure out what you're going to put on the table? That's why, yes, I deal with artists, but I also work with people involved in all forms of creativity. And one of the funny things I have sometimes at a conversation at a party is I'll say what I do, and they'll say, well, I'm not creative. How can you say you're not creative? You had to decide what to wear this morning. Okay? Every aspect of your day where you're doing something, there is actually a kind of creative process question involved. So it's not like the only difference between the average citizen, per se, and an artist is obsessed with it. Okay, it's become their vocation. That's it. You know, they still have to get up in the morning and figure out what are they going to look like and dress themselves. So this is applicable to pretty much anything you do. Anything else? One of the questions that I get, how many people here do have what they feel is a specific creative process, whatever it is? Okay. Now, one, like my son also has his creative process, and his sometimes responds to me, and I get this from a number of other artists, is, and you may have even heard this or even said this, and that is, I don't need to meditate because my creative process or my activity is a meditation. Does that sound familiar? I see some nodding heads. Okay, so, and my response is, that may be true, but you can't know that unless you have a meditation practice. Okay. You can guess at it, but you can't know it. And the reason why there's a little subtle difference between the two is because in meditation practice, if you really think about the instruction and what you're doing, you're kind of coming as close as possible as a human being can come to doing absolutely nothing without falling asleep and falling over. Okay? When you engage in the creative process, you are moving, you're in movement. You can be totally in the flow. You might not be self-referencing or self-conscious of what you're doing. You may not be hesitating. You may not have any issues with that. But you're still doing something. And until you cease, you can't know for sure. So that's why I encourage people to sit. And then if they decide they don't need to sit, well, that's up to you. You're going to make your own decision anyway, right? But when you develop a formal practice, one of the interesting things that happens is you learn there's a thing called meditation in action. It actually starts with first formal meditation. And then you just notice this curious thing that happens when you sit. After you sit, you still feel like you're sitting. Now, in the beginning, it goes away pretty quickly. You know, I got to pay the bills, I forgot to feed the dog, it's Tuesday, whatever. Okay. Zzz. But the more you sit, the more you have that post-meditation experience. The longer it occurs. The landing zone for the creative process or whatever gets bigger. It's easier to define. It's not, I don't have to have that many cups of coffee. I don't have to circumnavigate the desktop computer so many times. I can land more. And then you also find that instead of the breath necessarily being the object of meditation, your actual process becomes the object of meditation. So you're not sitting there saying to yourself, oh, I am now meditating on my next brushstroke or my next typewritten word or how I fold a napkin. You are there. Your mindfulness just simply switches. As Mipam Rinpoche has said many, many times, we are always meditating for the most part, only it's either on our worries, the television, the movie, our kids, the dog, the floor, the sky. So anybody can meditate. All you're doing is switching up the object of meditation to your breath. And in the creative process, you can do it within your creative process. But you can't really learn fully how to do it until you do it in stillness. Because everything in our life is pushing us toward movement. And unless we can see that contrast, we're not talking about trying to have a still mind. We're not talking about being thoughtless. One of the ways to see this in terms of meditation is if you could imagine your mind as a gigantic traffic jam. Now for me it would be like the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, the most heavily trafficked freeway in the world. Your mind is like bumper to bumper traffic. And when you sit and meditate, what you're doing is you're allowing some space between the cars. Just a little bit of space. The cars don't have to go away. We just want to allow some space. We want some space so there's room for something to arise. Something involving your creative process. That's what you're doing when you're trying to land. You're trying to unpack things that are going on in your head enough for something to arise. And one of the benefits of meditation is a certain kind of clarity, so when something does arise, you can actually recognize it. And it isn't just another car. Okay? And then it's possible to apply that. Now, sometimes what happens is we develop some meditation practice and we have some space between the cards and we know something's going to arise, and what do? We're like spiders laying in wait. So what do? We want to pounce on the first good idea that comes up, the first inspiration that pops up. Well, what I want to encourage you is don't lay in wait. In fact, when something does pop up, let it go. The reason for that is you have to have a certain investment in the process. It would be like farming the land and planting your seeds and say, look at this. You've killed it, okay? And nothing else is going to grow out of that space. So you have to allow it to happen. For a while, you have to let whatever the stuff you don't like come up and to let go. That's easy, okay? We want to do that. But the stuff we do want, we also have to let go. We can't pounce on it, so that we can create a larger ground, a larger space for more to happen, so we can recognize it and work with it in a gentle, non-aggressive fashion. That doesn't mean we can't produce artwork that is quite challenging, quite interesting, quite unusual. It doesn't have to be pacifying. It can be many, many, many different things. But we want it to be, in a sense, arise out of that space. I certainly have a few more things I could say, but anything that you would like to share of this?
So you're saying procrastination is good?
You know, in a certain sense, yes, but I'm saying to switch the modality of the type of procrastination.
Procrastinate better.
Yes, by meditating.
Mindfully.
Okay. The reality is that creative stuff is actually coming up all the time, and we're just really smashing it down. Because we are so caught up in our process of procrastination, or the stuff that's going on in our heads, we can't, in a sense, identify the creative stuff from all the other stuff. Because sometimes it seems like just other stuff. That's why the space is needed. The giving yourself the time and investing the time to allow something to arise allows that process to also to be able to recognize it as it is, and it's not just other stuff.
Can you
Yeah, that was
give
great.
like a concrete example of when you know to act? If you're waiting for not the first thought or chain of thought?
Actually, that raises a couple of interesting issues. When you have, in a sense, landed, you've already found yourself starting to work. It's almost as if you know because you can see the footprints in the sand. So it doesn't even become a question. Like I work with a lot of writers. I'm also a writer myself, and we talk about artist block, or I can't write it. I don't know what to do. What am I going to do? I can't get any further. I can't write the next sentence. I said, well, there's a couple of things you can do, but one of the things you can do right away is go for a walk, come back, and read through what you've written. Just read through it. There's a high degree of certainty that you'll either find yourself starting to correct what you have written, and you'll add at least a few sentences or something like that. And then if you're stuck again, go for another walk, or if you're into meditation, meditate, and then read through from the beginning. And you'll find yourself being seduced into it, and you'll be just doing it, rather than worrying about doing it. Because it's just another thought. If you're doing meditation practice, you know that you've already been instructed that when stuff comes up, it's the label of thinking, right? Something like that. So, same thing. Stuff comes up while you're doing your process, you can still call it thinking, and come back to the moment. Come back to being present. It's all about returning to being present. How can you make artwork if you're not present? If you're somewhere else, if you're thinking about something else, like in my classes, one of the things I also teach is I teach all about materials that have to do with the artistic process. And I also teach about Asian materials. And one of the things, and when people are learning about Asian materials, is they'll buy Asian paper and they'll notice that, boy, you know, this is hard to work with. You know, if I make a mark, it just bleeds right out. You know, I mean, haven't they figured out how to size paper? Yeah, they invented paper. They know how to size paper. The reason why they don't put a lot of sizing in the paper is because when a person is being creative and making brush strokes, it's supposed to also reflect the person's state of mind as to whether they are present. So if you're going to make a brush stroke and you start thinking about Thursday's dinner, your stroke bleeds out. So you're not only seeing the artwork in a sense, what is being revealed is the mind of the artist, the presence of the artist. So when you see these works, they're quite astonishing when you realize it's done with a lot of quick brush strokes and there's no like mistakes. And it's only because they were just present, that's all. It's just the discipline of coming back over and over again to the space. Did I see a hand up for a moment? No? Can we have a hand up for a moment? Yes?
Pierre Boulez wrote Israel of the River Clyde, but he also wrote Planet of the Apes. And in that book, there was an interesting discussion on the difference between aping with slight changes and versus creativity. And he was questioning creativity. What is it really?
What is creativity?
That's what I'm asking you now.
It's the act of being human.
As opposed to an ape, just because you're human?
Well, I don't want to eliminate apes. I mean, our DNA is very, very close. And in fact, they've done a recent study actually with crows. They found out they may actually have the intelligence of maybe a 1 or a 2-year-old child. So they make tools, they mourn their dead. There's a lot of, so I don't want to just limit it to that, but I want to just more address what we know most about, which is the person who wakes up in the morning, gets out of bed, and gets through their day. So to me, it's the act of being human. One of the great advantages that I think we have is the ability to communicate. All art is about communication, even when it's not. Because when it's not about communication, it's communicating that. So it's always about communication. And as beings, we are so much involved with that. Now, I don't want to say dolphins don't, I just can't. That's an interesting issue. I study a lot of cognitive science as well, so there's a lot of interesting issues about that. But that's the best way I can answer your question. So it's something we all engage in as human beings. Try not to be creative when you think about it. Try to stop yourself. Okay.
Can we ask about anything?
Yeah. Well, you know, not my bank account or.
I wanted to go back to the sex. No.
Yeah.
No, I was just interested, Steve, in your thought about you had us go into this landing and then separate the spaces between the cars. And then further, you had us look at what came up, good or bad, and we let those go instead of immediately acting on them.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point, acting on them.
Yes.
Okay. And my question is can you say something about art in terms of who's doing it? You know, am I doing this or am I getting out of the way? I don't want to get wooing about this, but I'm very curious about that because you said that ideas are happening all the time, and I'm thinking, well, okay, that sounds cool, but whose ideas are they if I don't know that they're there? You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
So can you say a little bit about
That's
that?
a wonderful question because the issue always comes up about this notion of self-expression. Particularly in the West, we have this notion we want to express ourselves. So, are we actually expressing ourselves when you think about it, or are we expressing who we think we are? Do we know who is actually expressing? Do we have any idea? So we're actually not that sure what self-expression is because we're not really sure who the self thing is. Okay. So when you think about self-expression, at least what we contrasted with in Shambhala art is this notion of what's called pure expression. So what's the difference between that? Is it turns out self-expression and pure expression are also expressing yourself. But self-expression from the point of view of these teachings is one where you are self-conscious, you are self-dialoguing, it's all about you. And when you produce that artwork, basically you're producing it for your own pleasure and the pleasure of those people who kind of understand you and your language or your grammar or whatever it is. The notion with pure expression is you're not spending a lot of time thinking about yourself. It's basically, the self is just kind of, it's doing its thing. The cars are going, but there's some space. And out of that, you are acting without the self-dialogue, without the self-consciousness, without the hesitation, without the artist block. It's just like, as Trungpa Rinpoche talks about, it's like mushrooms growing and popping up in a meadow, lightning, thunder. It happens. It doesn't need this other thing going on saying, I'm doing this, can I sell this? Is this great? Well, I like it. Will anyone understand it? Do I understand it? Even when we drive down the street, are we thinking, I am now taking my foot off the gas and I'm putting it 12 inches over to the brake? And we don't need all that extra stuff. And we can actually learn to let it relax, which is what the benefit of meditation does. It allows that self-consciousness and all that self stuff to just soften up a little bit. And it turns out then whatever is being expressed is more likely to be whoever you are rather than who you think you are. Does that help in any way?
Like it.
That means I get to come home with you tonight?
Yeah, you can spend another night, yeah.
I can spend another night, okay, yes.
Sometimes that way, that seems almost a little disembodied to me. I mean, I sort of get into that, and it's I appreciate what your friend said about it also being meditative, but it isn't really, because it is an active process. But it sometimes feels as if it is someone else that's this is me. I mean, what I feel. Creating. So I'm sort of looking at it. You know what I mean?
Right. It actually needs a further conversation. It's not that it's different. It just needs additional information because there's a thought process involved in it. And when in a sense we're also talking about having space between our thoughts, and I also write. So, and please correct me if I'm not getting to your question. But the sense is that in addition to the self-consciousness, sometimes we do disembody ourselves from ourselves. And we're kind of like a watcher of ourselves doing it. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay. What Shambhala art is really teaching is about also how to be in your body. Okay, so that there is no witnessing. You're not unconscious either. There is in the cognitive science, I believe they call it meta-consciousness. It's consciousness of being conscious. That's awareness. Awareness is okay. Okay, but when we're getting into this, Steve, I can see Steve doing this, and I know Steve from way back when, and I'm going to write this and all of that. Now, we don't want that, and we're not looking for that. Now, at the same time, a question that arises is sometimes people write from their personal history, and it's very deep, and it's very intimate, and it's very challenging and very difficult to do. Those things that come up still come up within that space. It's still part of the creative process. You can reach in and do it because you're not doing it as a therapy. You're not trying to self-reflect on it. It's just coming out as part of the creative process. So it blossoms just like mushrooms in a meadow or hailstones and so forth. Does that come to address your question in any way?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The thing is, we actually don't have to work all that hard. That's the scary part. That's really scary because we think we have to gear up. If you want to read a very interesting book that I encourage people to read in this program, which of course it's not required, is a book called Harebrained Tortoise Mind: How Intelligence Increases When You Think Less.
It's a great,
I'll get to your question in a second. 11 million bits of information is received by our brains every second, of which only 200 are actually processed by the conscious mind. So there's all this stuff going on that we can't keep track of it anyway, for which our body and the rest of us is. If you want any hope of getting past that 200 bits, you kind of have to sit and quiet down to listen. Because what they found is, after that 200 bits, the mind just forms preconceptions. It just gets overloaded and says, you know what, I'm really tired. This rope is a snake and I don't care. So with meditation, you allow more to take place. Now, I'm not saying that if you meditate a lot, you're going to get up to 11 million bits. But it would be good if we could just get a little past our preconceptions, our usual routines, our things that we think sometimes are helping us, but are actually drowning us. You know, the thing is stuff is popping up all the time, and we just have to relax to appreciate it and see it and enjoy it and make use of it. You know, and this program really is about pointing out things that you already know, but you didn't know that was okay? It's like, oh, you make a left turn here and then a right, because if you make the right and then the left, it takes you to the wrong place. That place where you're just spinning out of control.
Can I add something, because you just said this program, so I want, it's a kind of a good
Shambhala Art program.
It's a good segue for me to just
Yeah.
say a couple of things.
Okay, please.
Because we're actually running towards the end here, so
Okay.
we can take a few more questions, but let me throw this out, which is, we are going to offer these, excuse me, these specific teachings, the Shambhala Art teachings, which Steve and I and some of the other teachers in this room did study originally with the originator of these teachings, Chogyam Trungpa, and we have a set of very wonderful exercises and teachings and classes that will be offered in this area. And even to prepare for that, we have lots of classes beyond just the open house for practicing meditation and deepening and quickening this process of beginning to get space in our minds. So for instance, next weekend, we have a whole weekend offered, Saturday and Sunday, of sitting and lectures and interviews and discussion groups, etc., to probe this whole process of meditation more deeply. So that's called Shambhala Training Level 1, and it's very closely related to these Shambhala Art teachings, and I would say that if in any way you can, if you're interested in the Shambhala Art teachings, if you can commit yourself to begin to practice regularly, whether through coming to a weekend program or just coming on Sunday evenings or sitting at home, you'll get a lot more out of these Shambhala Art programs that we'll be offering. So I just thought I could
Oh, yes.
stick that plug.
That was the commercial announcement. Yeah, I'm going to add one more commercial announcement, and I'll take your question. Remember, shambhalaart.org. Okay? 2 words put together, 2 A's there, shambhalaart.org. Go see what we're about, and we'll take some more questions. Yeah.
The last question you were answering was like when you mentioned like you take a right turn and you make a left turn, and so my perception of art is like similar to like our meditation practice, where there isn't a goal, the path doesn't lead to anywhere. So similar with art, like I find myself making a right turn and a left turn, and you never know. Even if I stop, I still sometimes doubt myself, hey, there could be still a right turn and a left turn,
Right.
which I missed.
Yes, good point. First of all, there are many forms of creative process. And one style of creative process is you don't know where you're going to end up. It's all about discovery and play, and you play with the discoveries. But there are other art forms where you can have something in mind, okay? And you can discover and play Maybe you'll get there, maybe you don't, but you have a path. Like, for example, when you're writing a story, you have a kind of end in mind, but sometimes you don't know how you're going to get there. Sometimes you do know how you're going to get there, but you don't really know how it's all going to turn out. Sometimes the characters start happening in your head, and they're talking to one another. I've worked on projects where by the time I finally got done with it, I couldn't wait to finish it, to kill these characters in my head. I couldn't stand the chatter and the arguments they were having, okay? So there's all types of art forms. In fact, sometimes, you know, a lot of us have these ideas about conceptual art. You know, it's like, oh, well, that's highly conceptual. I mean, how can you have creative process? How can you have this, you know, space between your thoughts? And they're talking about concepts, you know. I mean, isn't that totally antithetical to what art is, or the creative process? Sometimes I like to point out that there's an artist called Joseph Kosuth, and one of his common pieces, if you go to a museum to see it, is he has a chair in the gallery, and he has a photo of the chair next to it, and he has the definition of the word chair blown up next to that. So we got chair, chair, and chair, and we're being asked, well, what's the chair? Which is the chair? What is chairness? What is art? It's an exploration. There's no answer in that artwork, but it forces you back to a gut sense of, well, what makes a chair to me a chair? So you don't always know where you're going. You don't know necessarily in some forms, and in some other forms you do know. It's an exploration of what art is, even. You know, the one definition of art is it's the exploration of what art is, or what makes art art. So there are many, many possibilities and many avenues. Part of it, what we encourage in Shambhala Art, is for you to find that particular creative process, that style that resonates most with you, and explore it by integrating meditation and contemplation into your process. Does that help? Or?
It does. So I kind of find myself, I do commercials on television.
Yes.
So at the process, like after I'm done, and the commercial is 30 seconds, so I always look back at it and say, this could have been done that way. Because
Right.
say I'm selling a Coke product,
Yes.
we can sell it like 100 different ways.
Yes.
There's no one right way.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's like always at the end of it, like
Yes.
always this question which arises, the doubt,
Yes.
am I done? There's something that still can be done better, something
Yes.
that always could be added.
Yes. Well, you could, I don't think you look at it this way, but you could look at it as, oh gee, or you could look at it, isn't that interesting? How it, now I can see all these things I didn't see before. And it becomes included in the process for the next time. There's a term that we use called square one, and that is we're constantly trying to come back to square one. When we do our meditation practice, in a sense, we're coming back to square one. We're grounding ourselves in it. So the interesting thing is that square one doesn't have to be just the little square we're seated on. It could be a very big square. It could be very inclusive. We can include all kinds of aspects of the creative process that we engage in. And we can include all kinds of artwork that we might have thought was a bit challenging or we didn't totally understand, because you know what? The world, phenomenal world, is constantly speaking to us. Most of the time it's even shouting at us, and we're not even listening. We're totally, I shouldn't say totally tuned out. You're here, you can't be totally tuned out. Okay? We're tuning it out, and we're trying to edit it, and we're constantly trying to manipulate it. If we would allow it to speak to us, there's so much it's trying to tell us and inform our vision. And it's just a matter of being inclusive. And I'm gonna leave you all with an interesting question that I pose sometimes to my students at Art Center. And that is, I sometimes ask, you know, do you have a definition of art? And of course, most people will say, well, no, I'm not gonna touch that one. But the reality is, if we are engaged in the creative process, we do have a definition of art. If we didn't have a definition of art, how would we know when to start, and how would we know when to stop? Otherwise, we would just keep going. So there is something, even though we might not have intellectualized it. There's something that's going on, and that's worthy of investigation. It's very worthy of investigation. It's very worthy of contemplation. And it's something that meditation can help explore. That moment, the start moment and the stop moment. It's up to you. Okay.
But if you take a chair or any art or chair, is it really just a chair, or is it something that's becoming something that isn't created, fully?
There's it's an interesting question. When does, I don't know if you're addressing this, but when does the manufacture of a chair transcend to the level of it being art?
Or even art, where there's no end.
There's no what?
There's no end to a chair. A chair's something else on that.
Oh yeah, it organically changes. I mean, there are art forms that intentionally just self-destruct over time. That's part of the process of what the statement. And chairs, everything, we all fall apart. It's called.
They just run out, but it's on its way to becoming maybe what a perfect chair is going to be.
Yeah. There's all these endless possibilities. That's why it's so interesting. I just can't think of a better journey than meditation and some creative process. Again, you don't have to hear the word creative process and immediately leap to the Louvre in Paris, okay? It can be, one of the things that people take away from our program when we talk about, working with object arranging in space, form, and energy, is they go home and they start rearranging the whole house because they see it with new eyes, with fresh eyes that they haven't seen before. So it's about exploration. It's about the exploration of your state of mind, your state of being, and what communication is all about. I mean, I'll end with this. Isn't it, when you think about it, people sometimes talk about miracles. I mean, to me, a miracle is that I have something in my head right now. And it's making my lips and stuff flap, and the air is vibrating, and somehow it's making it across the room, and it's going in some weird bone thing, tissue thing, and it's going into your head. And we're kind of talking about something, and something is being transmitted of some kind. And if that's not a miracle, I don't know what is. Okay? So it's a very powerful communication, and one of the things about art is it can communicate with or without words through direct experience if we are open to experiencing. So I thank you for your patience. I'm sure you had other things to do, and it's very nice of you to come out here.
So I do want to thank you, Steve.